So this, as usual, is being recorded to be popped up on YouTube at a later date. Don't worry, you guys won't be in it. So let's have a look first. So as usual, I'm just going to run you quickly, for those of you who don't know, through the housekeeping rules. So as I've said, cameras on or off, I don't mind. Please keep yourself on mute at all times, so that I don't hear any confidential setting conversations or anything in the home. Any questions, please pop them into the chat box as you think of them. I'll come to them at the end. Do come and go as you need. We've all got children, pets, family at home. If you need to go and pop off and pop back on again, that's fine. Slides will be emailed to you, so please don't panic about making too many notes. Still letting people in at the moment, so there's more and more of you joining, which is lovely. So as you know, this is being hosted by our local Stronger Practice Hub, and tonight we have got Damon and Lisa on the call with us, so thank you to them for joining us this evening. Just in brief, because I know a lot of you have heard this before, but we know that Stronger Practice Hubs support the earlier settings to improve outcomes of your children in your setting in the local area. And there's 18 Stronger Practice Hubs in the UK, and this one is based at the Barn Nursery School in Grinstead Green. And this is being funded by the Department for Education as part of the Early Years Education COVID-19 Recovery Fund. Depending upon where you are in your career as an early years practitioner, these are all the different ways that the Stronger Practice Hub can help you, which you can look at your leisure later. And again, please do check out, to supplement this, the Early Years Evidence Store. So this has got a wealth of information on it for early years practitioners, not just about speech, language and communication, but about all different aspects of the early years foundation stage: literacy, numeracy, play, all sorts. So do go and have a look. Just a nod to some things that are being offered by the Stronger Practice Hub. We've got the Early Years Professional Development Programme, Talking Time, and as well, if there's something there that you think you need that isn't listed, do get in touch with the Stronger Practice Hub, who can offer you bespoke support packages as well. Okay, so we're thinking tonight, as we said, about speech sounds. And a term that you'll see a lot of potentially in your speech and language therapy reports or in any articles that you might read is the word phonology. And the word phonology stands for how sounds function in a particular language or across languages, and the sound system. So for example, how come I can have str together in the language, but I can't have st? We don't see that combination, do we? Why can certain sounds and letters be combined, and why can certain sounds and letters not be combined? Phonological development is something that every child goes through, and it's the process of forming, combining and using speech sounds to clearly communicate in your language. So it's putting the sounds together correctly that follow the rules, and the end product is nice, clear speech. Now, this is a slide from my very first webinar about typical speech and language development, but I think it's very important that we run through this again. And before I launch into thinking about speech sounds, I just wanted to give a warning. There will be quite a lot of jargon this evening. I've tried to keep it as minimal as I can, and there's quite a lot of theory as well. Now, the theory from today will underpin the next 2 sessions of what do we do if I can't understand a child. Now, I don't know about you, but I do, my nature is to get very frustrated when I'm just hit with theory, because I really just want to skip to the good bit, please. I want to know what I've got to do. But unlike language, if you're working correctly on a child's speech, it can have an impact if you don't do it in the right way that can cause a speech and language therapist a bit more work. Primarily in terms of a child's confidence. So children who find speech sounds difficult, very often, but not always, they know that people can't understand them. And actually you need to work on it in quite a specific way to make sure that that doesn't happen and the confidence doesn't drop. There are also certain red flags as I'm going through therapy where I have to change direction quite quickly because I can see another problem cropping up if I don't change what I'm doing now. So you've got to be really careful with speech in a different way to language. With language, you can't really go too far wrong, but with speech, you can create other problems. So it's really important that you stick with me through the theory and trust that the next couple of webinars will be your kind of, and this is what I do. All right. So development of speech sounds, babies learn speech sounds systematically and in a fairly consistent order, whatever the language, okay? But we need to think about what influences that development. So we need to think about their growing oral physiology. So everything is growing, maybe at different rates. Hearing and listening and attention. If you can't hear the sounds, you won't make the sounds. And this is why we have issues with children who have a diagnosed hearing loss, whether that's a permanent hearing loss or whether it's a glue ear type hearing loss. If you can't hear the sounds, you won't be able to make the sounds. Equally with attention, if a child can't attend for long enough to get good input in terms of their speech and language, they're going to find speech sounds potentially very difficult. Sucking and feeding. So we use the same muscles to suck and feed and eat as we do to speak. So if I have a child whose speech sounds aren't quite right, and the mum tells me that they only really like yogurt or soft food, do I have then an idea that perhaps there might be something going on with the musculature around the mouth? The complexity of the movement required as they're growing can be a factor, and the opportunity to play and practice making sounds. So reading between the lines, that is, does the child have a dummy in at points where they could perhaps be practicing using their speaking and their speech sounds? So articulators are basically the things we move or use to help us to make speech sounds. There's going to be no test on this at the end. Please don't panic. And again, you will have the slides to read through again at your leisure. So obviously we use our tongue, teeth, lips, and palate to mold the airflow that comes out of our mouth. So essentially when we're speaking, air is coming up through our vocal cords and out through the mouth, and how we move our mouth and teeth, and well, we don't move our teeth, but how we use our tongue against our teeth is how we're molding the different shapes, if you can imagine that. How do these change as a child grows? So many a time I've worked on the S sound with a child who's then gone to lose their two front teeth, and then we have to start again. What can go wrong? And how can these changes affect speech? Many times parents come to me going, I think my child's got a tongue tie and that's why the speech is off. Tongue tie very rarely is an issue in terms of speech development because you don't move your tongue up and outwards for any of the sounds other than for the. So really that's not always a problem, sometimes, but rarely. So again, there I've got loss of baby teeth, dummy use, bottle use, learned behaviours, and then something called VPI, which you don't need to know about. So how do we describe sounds? So as a speech and language therapist, or as anybody who learns about speech sounds, so linguists or phoneticians, we're thinking about three key things to describe a sound. We're thinking about place, manner, and voice, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about tonight. So the place is, as it suggests, where the sound is produced in the mouth. And I'm going to go all over these in a bit more detail in a minute. The manner is how the sound is made. So what are we doing with that airflow? And the voice is whether we are activating our voice box or our larynx or not. So let's first have a think about place. So if we look at this very complex and terrifying diagram, don't worry, it's really not. We're having a look to see which articulators we're using. So a bilabial sound is one where we use both of our lips. So that is a b, a p, or a m. So I'm pursing both of my lips together. Labiodental is where the lips are meeting the teeth. So that sounds like and v. Alveolar is our little ridge behind our top teeth. So if our tongue has to meet that in sounds such as d, t, or n, that would be an alveolar sound. Dental is where the two teeth come together. And then we head to things that are further back in the mouth. So a velar sound might be something like k or g, where you're making the sounds right at the very back of the mouth. Palatal sound might be like a y, where you can feel in your own tongue it's kind of making contact at the kind of middle part of the roof of your mouth. So the manner is what we're doing with the airflow, okay? And again, a bit more jargon, but don't panic. The main 4 families of sounds are plosives, fricatives, affricates, and approximants. Now, a plosive, this is the easiest to explain. Air is stopped somewhere in this vocal tract. It's compressed behind that closure and then released. Now, the easiest one to show you is the sound where you can see I'm building up pressure behind my 2 lips, my upper and lower lips, and then I'm letting it go. I'm going, and you can hear the explosion sound. You can hear that burst of air. And the same with b and t, d, and g. Now, k and g are made right at the very back of the mouth. T and d are made just at this alveolar, and p and b are with our lips. A fricative, if you think about the word friction, if you take the first part here, it's basically where we're impeding that airflow so that we end up with a frictiony, hissy sound. So for the sound, the air can escape, but I'm just putting my teeth and my lips in the way. And you can feel that friction and you can hear that friction. And what I'm hoping is that there's about 25 people in the east of England right now looking at their screens going, because you kind of can't not. That's whatever. I have parents sit in their kids' therapy sessions going, oh yeah, you do, don't you? And I hope you're all doing the same. If I think of the S sound, the snake sound again, I'm just putting my tongue slightly up and the air is escaping down either side. So the fricative sounds are these really hissy sounds. Incidentally, these are also the sounds that the first sound you miss if you have glue ear. So the, s, z, they are the ones that are going to go first, and sh as well. Okay. An affricate, there's only 2 in English, are ones that they start as a plosive and then they end as a fricative. Crazy. So a ch starts as a t and ends as a sh. If you say ch in a really slow motion, if you imagine you're in slow motion, you'll hear it starts as a t and ends as a sh. Ch. And for j, it starts as a d and ends as a j. J. So I'm looking at that as well when I'm looking at what a child is doing. And then finally, an approximant. These are fun for the speech nerds. So the other term for these is semivowels, because they're actually, if you run them through a computer, they are very similar in quality to a vowel. And the reason for that is because we don't actually stop that airflow in the same way that we do with the others. We're just really heavily molding it. And so these are l, w, r, and y. So if you make the sound w, actually nothing is blocking anything. All we're doing is really just molding it. W, 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 w. You're not stopping the airflow at all. Y and r. You're just molding it really heavily. And so that's why they're very similar in quality to a vowel. And you'll see later that actually these 4 sounds, l, w, r, and y, are quite easily confused in typical development. Voice. Please don't be alarmed by the next slide. It is showing you your vocal cords. Okay, at first glance, you may not think it is. These are your vocal cords, okay? So when we make sounds, we either use our voice box or we don't. Now, if we look at the sounds b and p, so b and p, they are both a bilabial sound. They are both a plosive sound. The difference is b, 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 b. I'm using my voice. And if you want to put your hand on your larynx and say b, 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 you will feel your voice box vibrating. If you say the same sound but turn your voice off and go, your vocal cords are remaining open. Nothing is happening. And then you'll feel that nothing is happening here either. So if you say b, 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 and p, that's the difference. So some children have voicing errors where they voice where it shouldn't be voiced, or they don't voice where it should be, okay? And we have lots of counterparts in speech. So if you think about the sound, that doesn't use your voice, but the is exactly the same sound, but does. Again, if we take k, 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 but we put our voice on and go g, 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 you can see that voice on, voice off, or voiced and voiceless, as we say in speech and language therapy. You can see that contrast. Okay. And what you end up with, if you go along the lines of becoming a speech and language therapist, is that you have to be able to, like that, describe what a voiceless alveolar plosive would be, which would be a t. So if you hear, I'm not using my voice, my tongue is making contact with my alveolar ridge behind my teeth. I'm stopping the airflow and then I'm letting it go. Voiced by, I've got that one wrong. See, I did this late at last night. Spot the mistake. Voiced bilabial plosive is not a p. It should be a b because that's voiced. It should be a voiceless bilabial plosive there. Should have proofread my presentation better, shouldn't I? A voiceless alveolar fricative. So fricative is one of those hissy sounds. And then a voiced palatal approximant would be a y. All right. Now, you don't have to do this at all. And this is not in your remit. But what I'm trying to demonstrate is the complexity of working on speech sounds. For a speech and language therapist, it is not the alphabet. We're looking much, much more deeply at it. And actually, what you can see here is an example of the International Phonetic Alphabet. So there is a symbol for every single sound that your mouth can make. If you look in the dictionary, you will see words written in this. And this is where anybody who knows the International Phonetic Alphabet in any country in the world would be able to read it. There's also what we call some diacritics. So if there's particular qualities to the sounds as well, perhaps if you've got the air coming out of the nose rather than the mouth as it should, you might put a little N next to it. And speech and language therapists are trained in this. We have to be able to write in this like that. We spend many hours doing it. So for example, you can see, I just thought I'd pop up some sentences here. So a lot of people ride bicycles in Italy. Can you play the guitar? How far do you walk every day? So actually, when I was doing my first degree in English language and linguistics, back in the day, this was before, heaven help me, before we all had the internet and everything, we would write letters to each other in the IPA as practice for this. And if you have the opportunity to sit in on a speech and language therapy assessment with a child who's having a speech sound assessment, you might see something like this. So this is a child's speech assessment that I did using an assessment called the CLEAR. And this is one that, again, you might see referenced in your speech and language therapy reports. So the CLEAR assessment elicits every sound in English in every word position. So if we look at this top one here, we're looking at p. We've got pencil where the p is at the start of the word, teapot where it's in the middle, sheep where it's at the end. Similar for b, I've got b at the start for boat, in the middle for baby, and at the end for crab. So what this gives me the luxury of is looking to see whether there's not only whether there's a sound that's a particular issue, but whether there's a particular word position where it's a particular issue. And that's what your speech and language therapist is looking for. It's all about spotting patterns, and it's all about working out whether those patterns are typical patterns or atypical patterns based on the child's age. And this is where I think for you guys, it's going to start to get good. Okay, this is what you're kind of going to want to know. Please be very careful when you're looking online for the speech sound development norms. There are heaps and heaps and heaps of tables like this. And I have seen them vastly differing. Now, I like this one because it's probably one of the most recent, and it's also from the Goldman-Fristow test of articulation, which is kind of a core test that's been around for a long, long time. And this table shows you the age at which 85% of the children tested had acquired this sound in these positions. So this is what you need to be looking for. So actually by the age of 2, they should have b, d, h, m, n, and p at the start of the sound, but only b, m, and n in the middle, and only m and p at the end. But this kind of shows you quite a nice overview. So you can see that actually some of the clusters or the combinations of consonants don't really come until about the age of 7. So if I have a child who's saying thumb instead of thumb when they're 4, I'm not going to therapy that because that's typically developing. And that's what your speech and language therapist should be doing. They should be looking to see, okay, what's typical, what's in line with, with their peers, and what isn't. So why doesn't it surprise us that things don't happen that easily and things can go awry? I'm going to talk you now through some normal phonological processes. So phonological is a posh word for speech sound, but I'm practicing what I preach here. So in all of my previous webinars, I've said, don't shy away from the big words because of vocabulary. So I thought I'd do that with you here as well. So normal phonological or speech sound processes. What are they? Why do children go through them? And when do they disappear and how? So a phonological process is basically a pattern of sound errors that typically developing children use to simplify speech as they learn to talk. There's a lot to do when we learn to talk. There's a lot of sounds to learn. There's a lot of combinations to learn. There's a lot of things that our muscles need to do that they haven't done before. They're still learning to coordinate all of the articulators for the clear speech. And complex words can be simplified, but they're in predictable and consistent ways. For example, all of you will have heard a child, instead of saying a banana, say a nana. Okay. All of you will have heard, instead of butterfly, a child saying buffy. Okay. And that is predictable and consistent and typically developing. Plain, they might simplify that cluster in just to pain. I see a pain, and that again, fine. So these are considered normal until typically developing children would normally stop. So you would not give therapy at this point or intervention of any sort unless it occurs with many other processes. So I might have a child who has got 4, 5, or 6 typical processes, but they are all together having a significant impact on intelligibility. I might go in for therapy there. However, if there's just a couple, just 2 or 3, which I can still understand the child overall, the speech just sounds a bit immature, I would leave it. So, phonological processes that typically developing children go through, and when they typically stop. So devoicing. So we've spoken, this is why you need to have some of that theory. So where instead of pig, we're using the corresponding D-voiced sound. So they might say pit instead of pig. Assimilation is where if I have a b and a s, they're very different sounds. That's quite a complex change to make in the mouth. Bus. It's quite difficult when you're little. So they might just go bub. They know there needs to be a sound on the end, but it's just easier to copy the first sound, so they repeat it. Final consonant deletion, I see an awful lot of this in my practice. So instead of cup, we have ka. Instead of cat, we'll have ka. Instead of dog, we'll have do. I see a lot of this going well beyond the age of 3 years, and it's usually co-occurring with other things. Fronting is slightly less common. So those back sounds and g are consistently replaced with their counterpart front sounds t and d. So instead of go, you might have do. Instead of pat, you might have tat. And that's what fronting is. Stopping is where instead of using one of our hissy fricative sounds, you replace it with a plosive. So instead of fan, we might have pan, or instead of zoo, we might have do. Again, typical up to the age of 3.5. 4 years, we are still seeing up to the age of 4, that syllable deletion, which we've talked about. So nana instead of banana. Cluster reduction. So if you have a cluster of consonants together, like fr or bl or gr or cl, just reducing it down to the one. So you might have fog instead of frog, or I don't know, seats instead of sweets, for example. De-affrication. So we're looking at those affricates again. So do you remember our ch and j, where we take away the zhuzhy bit, the hissy bit, and just have the stoppy bit. So instead of chew, chew, we have the to. Again, normal up until the age of around 4. Stopping of affricates. So instead of cheese, we have tease, or tip, we have ship. Gliding. Now, this is our l, w, r, and y that I spoke about, those sounds that you're molding. Very often they get very, very confused until the age of around about 5. So we might say white instead of light, or wing instead of ring. And again, up to the age of 6 or 7, like I said before, thumb instead of thumb. So when I was growing up, that was a sign of a lazy speaker, if you said thumb. And that was corrected quite quickly out, probably before it was developmentally ready. I just wanted to leave you with this slide, which I think is really important. So expected intelligibility. So people often go, yeah, but how much do I need to understand a child, really? Normally by 1 year, we expect someone who doesn't know the child to understand about 25% of the child's spoken language, 50% by 2 years, 75% by 3, and you should expect to be able to understand 100% by 4 years. Now, that doesn't mean it's accurate. It means how much we understand. So I know if I hear a child go, I go get my shoes now, although they haven't said shoes, I know it's shoes. So that's fine. So it's how much you can understand, not how much is 100% accurate. Okay. So that's a lot of the theory. Coming up next time, so we're going to look in about a month's time at atypical speech sound processes. So we've looked today at what's normal up to a point. Next time, we're going to look at what really isn't typical. Okay, so those things where you need to be going, crikey, we need to get a speech and language therapist on board. And then in July, we're going to then look at, so what can I do in my setting if I have a child who I cannot understand? And hopefully that's going to be really helpful. I'm happy to answer some questions on this now. So if you have a child in your setting and you've dialed in sort of specifically to say, oh, they're doing this, they're doing that, should I step in? What can I do? I'm very happy to answer those questions now. That's absolutely fine. You don't have to wait until July. but July is going to be the one where you have the most take-home ideas for things. But as we know from all of your feedback, a lot of you have got children in your setting where you just aren't quite understanding, or you just feel that something's off. You just feel that something's just not sounding quite right. So if you do have questions, please pop them into the chat box now. I will stop sharing the screen, and then we can have a chat about if there's anybody in your setting.